Friday, monsters. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the MurderMurder News podcast. These weekly episodes also double as weekly meetings for our very own true crime cult.
That's right. We started a cult. But not to worry, you've landed on the cult with all the flower crowns and none of the flavor aid. Pull up a seat, mix yourself a witchy cocktail, or brew up a cup of tea and settle in for another terrifying tale of murder.
In case you're just finding us today, allow us to introduce ourselves, your charismatic leaders. I'm Angelina, and I'm hanging out with my pal Aurora, who we affectionately refer to as the Real Housewife of True Crime. Once you get to know us, you'll get it. How's your week going, Aurora?
Well, it's going pretty interesting. Yesterday, I ran into one of my all-time favorite actors in my hotel elevator, Titus Burgess.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yes.
So you're in the same hotel.
We're in the same hotel. And
that's cute.
It's amazing because, well, if you don't know him, he's in Kimmy Schmidt as Titus Andromedon, and he's so amazing. He also played Ursula in the live performance of Little Mermaid that toured a few years ago. I know he played at the Hollywood Bowl.
So cool.
And Ursula is my all-time favorite villain from Disney, and Poor Unfortunate Souls is my go-to karaoke, so I died.
Yeah, I'll bet. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And you said something like your dog tried to bite him or something?
It was not a completely pleasant interaction on my part and my dog's part. He was perfectly lovely. And he was like waiting for the elevator at the same time as me while I'm getting back from walking my demon Pomeranian Sebastian. And he's like kind of like looking at Sebastian and like, you know, like Sebastian's looking at him, but then Sebastian like starts barking and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then he like asked if I'm getting on the elevator. And I hadn't like looked at him like fully in the face because I've just like finished running in Pilates and I'm just whatever. And as soon as he says that, I'm like, I know that voice. And I look up and like in a barely like audible whisper, I'm like, are you Titus? So when she says yes, like I couldn't quite like hear him or he kind of turned away and I was like, wait, are you Titus? And he's like, yes, like kind of annoyed. And then like Sebastian like proceeds to like try to like bite him and bark at him getting onto the elevator. And I'm just like super awkward, making like the most uncomfortable conversation ever.
Hey, well, it's memorable oopsies. At this
point. But he's in my hotel. And I hope if I see him again, I'm just going to talk to him about how our hotel is haunted and ask him if he has a ghost in his room or something. Because this place is definitely haunted.
Get some ghost stories. Yeah, for sure.
And how about you? How's your week?
Really up and down. I was like getting super excited. I told you last night about I was getting ready to foster a baby squirrel.
Oh my God,
who I was about to pick up this morning, and he passed away.
Oh,
so no baby squirrel. But I did learn that this is really a thing in this city. Like when I was researching around for help and whatever with this squirrel and just what to do and who to contact and all of this, I found there's like a squirrel organization in the city who is so oversaturated with baby and injured squirrels that they can't take them anymore. They have no volunteers to take them. So they just like, when you write to them, they respond with this like automatic response of like, here's what to do with your squirrel and like stuff like that. And so it was really informative, and looking through their organization and seeing just how many squirrels are being helped around the city, I'm like, wow, this is really a thing. Like the squirrel rehab. Yeah. And they even have, the same organization has like a company that has like 3 or 4 like boutiques around town that are like squirrel boutiques, and they actually make
like for squirrel clothes.
Well, I'm not sure what else they've got there. Maybe squirrel clothes. I would like to check out, but they like have like baby formula that they made just for squirrels.
Oh my
gosh.
I
was getting excited about that, and I'm like, I can't believe that there's multiple stores that have this. Yeah, squirrel milk. They're milking squirrels. I don't know, but hopefully not. But but anyway, sounds cool. Maybe I'll volunteer. Maybe I'll still have a chance with another baby squirrel. So we'll see.
Wow. Well, let's pour one out for adorable baby squirrel. Rest in peace.
Yeah.
And we like to think of all of you as honorary monsters just for tuning into the show. But if you'd like to make it official, you can join the MMN commune on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/murdermurdernews and pledge a few bucks or a few hundred to show your support. To show you how much we appreciate you joining, we'll give you a flashy title like Grandmaster of Goats, send you a bit of murder merch, and of course, you'll have exclusive access to our regular patron-only content. Plus, right now, it seems like maybe you'll get your own baby squirrel as well.
Yeah, there's a surplus of squirrels. We'll send one out to you.
Got them.
Yep, that's it. We are the squirrel provider for the true crime world. I don't know.
Just a reminder that we are always open to suggestions of stories that you'd like to hear us cover on our show. We like to present stories from the corresponding week in true crime history on the podcast. But if your suggestion doesn't fit into our schedule, anything goes on Patreon.
Yeah. Now, before we dig into today's story, let's check out some of the true crime stories that have been making headlines this week.
Last Friday, California Governor Gavin Newsom granted a full pardon to Sarah Cruzan. Sarah was just 16 years old when she killed her trafficker, George Gilbert Howard, in a Riverside hotel room. She was sentenced to die in prison for the murder of the man she had said sexually abused her and trafficked her, starting when she was just 13 years old. Sarah served 18 years of her sentence before being released from prison by former California Governor Jerry Brown in 2013.
That's horrible. I can't believe she could have served 18 years for this.
I know, and gosh, just how young she was when it happened and when she was first trafficked. She just had no control over what she was doing. It's terrible.
Yeah, and we know of so many real murderers that never, were properly prosecuted for their crimes. So it's
so true.
Unfair.
Yeah.
On Monday morning, a 22-year-old gunman, Robert Cremo, opened fire at a 4th of July parade in Highland Park, a suburb of Chicago. The shooter climbed a rooftop of a local business and started shooting at parade goers around 10:14 a.m. He killed 6 and wounded 24. Robert was known to authorities and made violent social media videos under the name Awake the Rapper, with themes of school shootings and shootouts with police. Of those killed, 5 died at the scene and 1 died at the hospital. As of the time of this recording, the names of the victims have not yet been released, but they ranged in age from 8 to 85, with many of the wounded victims being children.
And P.S., you can see some of those videos. We'll post a link to one of them in a news article in our show notes. And the little videos he made are just absolutely horrific. We'll be right back after a quick commercial break from one of our fellow Darkcast podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to Cause of Death. My name is Jackie Moranti. I've been studying infectious disease for 14 years in various research settings. I have a Bachelor's of Science from Colorado State University in microbiology, immunology, and virology. I've worked with diseases like tuberculosis, SARS-1, and SARS-CoV-2, better known as COVID-19, and I've worked with EHV-1. It's my feeling that if we look back at the pandemics of the past, we may be able to better handle the pandemics of the future. The problem is, we have to learn our lessons first. Come along with me while I tell you about the pandemics, the epidemics, and the outbreaks, and how we never seem to learn our lesson.
And we're back.
Before we dig in, we want to offer a quick disclaimer. Though we joke about forming a true crime cult, that is not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, and we want you to know that we take the cases we're discussing very seriously.
We want to deliver each story with the utmost respect to victims and anyone involved. If you feel we've missed the mark, you don't like our tone, or if you notice we've gotten any details wrong, let us know with a quick email to murdermurdernews@gmail.com and we'll make it right.
Some specific trigger warnings for this week include child murder, child rape, sexual assault, graphic descriptions of violence, gun violence, and kidnapping. If any of those subjects are particularly sensitive for you, you may want to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
This week marks the 38th anniversary of the murders of Virginia Temple, along with her daughter, 10-year-old Rochelle. Virginia and Rochelle were brutally murdered in their home by serial killer couple Alton Coleman and Debra Brown during their 53-day reign of terror that spanned 6 states, resulting in a trail of murders, rapes, and robberies throughout the Midwest. The spree was so impactful that it prompted the FBI to expand their list of the top 10 wanted fugitives to 11, making room for Alton and Debra. Our sources for today include Fruit Loops, Serial Killers of Color, episode 20, Murderpedia, court documents, the Chicago Tribune, and more. For a full list of our sources, be sure to check our show notes. We do want to give an additional disclaimer that because this case is a little older and because of the way it was covered by the media at the time, it was difficult finding information about the victims. We would love to learn more about them in their lives. So if you're a friend or family member of the case, or just know something we don't, feel free to write us at murdermurdernews@gmail.com, and we'll happily share more information about their case in a future episode.
We've covered quite a few killer couples in the past, including Doug Clark and Carol Bundy, aka the Sunset Strip Killers, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, Jasmine Richards and Jeremy Steinke, and we talked quite a bit about Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo, aka the Ken and Barbie Killers, at our last book club. That got us thinking about the psychology behind the dynamic of couples who killed together. According to clinical and forensic psychologist Judy Ho, quote, after being entrenched together in something so serious that it escalates to the point of killing, it binds a couple closer together and creates this weird intimacy between them. As sick as it is, it's a very serious factor in a lot of these killings, end quote. An article in the Shreveport Times by Zach Beard goes on to mention, quote, in addition to the binding strength of love, the couple is also bound by the shared knowledge of the murder in which both played a role. Getting away with murder means keeping a secret, and sharing that secret with anyone requires an immense level of trust, end quote.
Forensic psychologist Katherine Bramslin explained that one partner is usually responsible for the violent turn, but willingly or reluctantly, the other often follows. According to Katherine, quote, one person in the couple is typically the instigator or mastermind. This is the person who comes up with the criminal intent, then coerces their partner to go along with them, end quote. She went on to explain that it may be difficult for the mastermind to convince their partner to participate initially, but once murder has been committed, a couple can begin to transcend into a state where both partners are truly and maliciously acting in criminal scenarios together. In the case of a heterosexual couple, Judy mentioned it's more common for the man to be the aggressor. And in cases where the woman is the aggressor, she likely had some sort of disruption in her upbringing, and that could have been some type of abuse or just sort of scary living conditions. Couples with at least one woman make the pair much more dangerous, as women are perceived as being less threatening to a victim. And we will definitely see that play out in the case of Alton and Debra.
Let's jump back to 1984. 9-year-old Vernita Wheat lived with her mom, 37-year-old Juanita, and her younger brother, 5-year-old Brandon, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. She also had an older brother, 19-year-old Anthony, who was away at college. Vernita was a straight-A student who loved to sing, liked comic books, and dreamed of moving back to Arkansas, where she had spent part of her childhood. She loved living in the South. She doted on her younger brother and would make him breakfast, comb his hair, and play with them. Sometime in April of 1984, Juanita befriended a man in the neighborhood, Robert Knight. Robert was handsome and charming. He spotted her one afternoon while riding his bike through her neighborhood and introduced himself to her while she waited for her laundry to dry. And he helped her with her laundry. He told her he lived in a house a couple of blocks away. The two got along well, with Robert coming over for dinner with Juanita and the kids a couple times a week.
On May 29, 1984, Robert stopped by the Wheat apartment, and their neighbor, Ellen Reeves, was visiting. Juanita introduced them. A carnival was in town, and he asked if he could take both of the kids. That night, Robert brought them home around 10:15 and told Juanita he had a belated Mother's Day present for her at his house. He had a stereo system he wanted to give her, but he would need help carrying it. He asked if the kids could come help. Juanita said Brandon was too little and Vernita had school in the morning. Robert persisted, and since he only lived 2 blocks away, Juanita finally agreed, but told him to make it fast. When 10:45 rolled around and the two still weren't back, Juanita got worried and went out looking for Vernita. She was concerned that Vernita would come home to an empty house, but at the same time, she felt like something was wrong. She went down to Robert's house, but the house had long since been abandoned with boarded up windows. He lied about where he had lived. What else had he lied about? After searching for Vernita for hours, she finally gave up and called the police. Around 11:35 p.m., the man identifying himself as Robert, along with Vernita, showed up at a nearby tavern called 400 Club in Kenosha. The man used the phone in the bar to call a taxi, and the two left. The taxi driver said the man initially requested that he drive them to Zion, Illinois, but he ultimately had them drop him off at Slater's Barbecue in Waukegan, which was about a 30-minute drive over the border in Illinois. Around 1:30 a.m., a witness saw a black man and a young black girl walking around Slater's Barbecue, and this is believed to be the last time Vernita was seen alive.
As is unfortunately often the case when young BIPOC girls go missing, police first assumed Vernita had run away. With Juanita's insistence that she would not have run away and she did not know Robert well, police finally decided to investigate the mystery man. There was no one named Robert Knight in the system, so police had Juanita look through mugshots to try to find out his real identity. Juanita was able to identify him, and it turns out his real identity was 28-year-old Alton Coleman, and Alton Coleman was a dangerous man. Alton seemingly had a rough start to life. He was born November 6, 1955, in Waukegan, Illinois, the third of 5 children. Some sources say his mother attempted to dispose of him in a trash can, and his grandma, Alma Hosea, retrieved him. His mom struggled to make ends meet and worked several jobs, one of them as a sex worker. He was mainly raised by his grandma, and some say she ran a brothel. Some sources also say she practiced voodoo. But as Wendy pointed out on the Fruit Loops podcast, the white media covering cases about Black people often try to add mystical elements we misunderstand about others' cultures and beliefs, so it's possible she did not practice voodoo. Nonetheless, Robert Evans, a minister who knew Alton from birth, has confirmed that he had a challenging home life which involved sexual abuse, rejection by his mom, and a generally unsafe environment. He was known to wet his pants, causing kids at school to nickname him Pissy. He joined a street gang when he was young and dropped out of school in middle school. He never kept a job long, and friends in the neighborhood said he was a hustler and sold drugs.
At the age of 16, he was charged with 2 robberies in Waukegan and was placed on probation. He was also charged with disorderly contact for damaging his mother's house after she wouldn't buy him a $6 jacket. On December 27, 1973, when Alton was just 18 years old, he committed his first rape with a friend of his, Leroy Charles Lockett. The two abducted 54-year-old Eleanor McIntyre at gunpoint and drove her to Evansville, Illinois. According to court documents, Alton raped her, and the two stole $100 and her car. Somehow, Alton was only convicted of armed robbery and not the rape or kidnapping through plea negotiations. He was sentenced to 2 to 6 years and was paroled in June of 1976. He wasted no time in finding his next victim. On September 13th, 17-year-old Sherry Patterson was driving her coworker, Joy, home from work. On the drive, Joy saw Alton, and the two women pulled over to see if he had seen Joy's boyfriend, since the two of them were friends. If we hadn't already alluded to it, Alton was a smooth talker and very charming. When they pulled over to ask him about Joy's boyfriend, Alton ended up in the car with the two of them, asking for a ride. Sherry dropped Joy off and was going to take Alton to wherever he needed to get to, but he tricked her and he had her drive him to the middle of nowhere. Alton overpowered Sherry and dragged her to an abandoned building where he raped her. Sherry reported the rape and Alton was arrested.
Just 6 days later, Alton was being held in the Lake County Jail for Sherry's rape, and he forced 3 inmates to have anal and oral sex with him. 2 of the victims were 19 and 1 was 18. He went to trial for Sherry's rape, and once again, justice seemed to evade the charming Alton as he was acquitted of the charges. Not long after, he was convicted of battery for raping the 3 inmates and was sentenced to 6 months in prison. On July 11, 1980, 22-year-old Dorothy Hawkins was stationed at the Great Lakes Naval Station in North Chicago. She was out dancing at a disco when she met the handsome, smooth-talking Alton, and she invited him to come have a picnic with her at the naval base. On July 18th, the two met up, and Dorothy was talking about trying to find an apartment somewhere off base to have a little bit more space for herself. Alton told her he knew of some apartments available, and they decided to go take a look. This was, of course, a lie, and Alton took Dorothy to an industrial area where he raped her. He dropped her back off at base, and Dorothy was able to identify him in a photo lineup. The case again went to trial, and he was again acquitted. A jury just wouldn't believe that a young man as charming and handsome as Alton could be a rapist. On September 28, 1981, 16-year-old Lisa Mann and 14-year-old Lisa Pfeiffer were hanging out together near their group home in Kenosha. The two were runaways and had been living in the same home together, and on this day, they ran into Alton and his friend Leonard Lynch. The two men took the two children to a liquor store and then to Leonard's apartment. Leonard raped 16-year-old Lisa Mann, and it's unknown what happened with Alton and 14-year-old Lisa Pfeiffer as the charges were dropped.
In June of 1983, Alton began molesting his 8-year-old niece, Melinda Snow. According to his half-sister, Terry Coleman, Alton had kissed and fondled the child over her clothes. On July 11, 1983, Alton had taken Melinda into the bathroom of Terry's apartment and again kissed and fondled her. He'd attempted to put his fingers inside of her when Melinda got out of the bathroom. Terry saw Alton rush after her, and Melinda told her mom what happened. Terry reported the incident, but on July 12th, Alton came over to her apartment and kicked her door down after finding out she had gone to the police. Terry dropped the charges out of fear of Alton coming after them. In North Chicago, on February 26, 1984, Dorothea Thompson waited for her 14-year-old daughter, Shalendra, to get off work at Burger King. Alton saw her waiting and wanted to chat her up. The two talked about Dorothea looking for work, and Alton offered to help, saying he knew of a place that was hiring. He offered to drop off an application at her place. On February 28th, he came over to their home with a supposed application. Dorothea wasn't there, so Shalendra let him in. Alton raped her at knife point. He forced her to write a note saying, quote, "Al, I really enjoyed our night together. We must do this again real soon. Love, Shalendra Thompson. P.S. Let this be our little secret." Alton was arrested for Shalendra's rape and was set to appear in court on May 30th, 1984, which brings us back to missing Vernita Wheat, who was kidnapped by Alton, aka Robert, on May 29th, the day before his arraignment. Vernita's mom, Juanita, had just identified Alton from a photo lineup after convincing the police she had not run away. On May 30th, the day after Vernita went missing, Alton returned home to change clothes for his arraignment for the rape of Shalendra. After his arraignment, he went on the run, staying with a friend.
An FBI task force was set up to search for Vernita. Alton's last known physical address was with his 73-year-old grandma, Alma. 21-year-old Debra Brown answered the door. Debra identified herself as Alton's girlfriend and said she had been living at Alma's house for a year to help take care of her. Debra was one of 11 children and had been engaged when she first met Alton. Her father was an alcoholic who had abused her as a child. Debra has an intellectual disability and suffered from a head trauma as a kid. At the age of 18, she was hospitalized for a drug overdose, but never had any issues with the law prior to this. According to her mom, she had always been a good girl growing up, and the trouble for her all started with Alton. The two met in a bar, and she broke off her engagement to go live with him and his grandma. Debra would not give any information to the FBI about Alton's whereabouts, but it's clear they were in contact, and we're not exactly sure why they weren't keeping an eye on her, because the two definitely met up, and this is when their killing spree together began.
They headed to Gary, Indiana on June 5th, and soon after initiated their first attack as a couple. On June 18th, 1984, 7-year-old Tamika Turks and her 9-year-old aunt, Annie Hilliard, were heading into town for a hot dog and some candy. They'd just gotten their hot dogs from a hot dog stand when they ran into Alton and Debra. They told the girls they had some new clothes to give away that would fit them. They invited the girls to come with them to go try them on and led the girls into a wooded area in the 4200 block of Grant Street. From there, the couple removed 7-year-old Tamika's shirt and tore it into strips to make binding. They tied the girls' arms and legs. Tamika started to cry, and Debra held her nose and mouth shut while Alton stomped on her chest and stomach. They carried Tamika out of the way, believing she was dead, and then came back for Annie. The two raped Annie together, and at one point, Tamika made a noise in the woods, so Alton and Debra went to strangle her to death. They came back to Annie and tied a belt around her neck and strangled her as well. They left both of the girls for dead, but miraculously, Annie survived. She wasn't able to find Tamika, but she was able to make it out of the woods to get help. A passerby spotted her bleeding, and she was rushed to a hospital. Annie was seriously injured with her intestines protruding through her vagina. Even with her injuries, she was able to give an accurate description of both Alton and Debra and remembered he had given her the nickname Slim. She was able to identify both of them.
25-year-old Donna Williams was a devout Christian who was an active member of her church. On June 19th, the day after the attack on Tamika and Annie, Donna met Alton and Debra under the guise of Phil and Pam from Boston. Donna invited the two to join her for church, and Phil and Pam willingly agreed. That night, she arrived at church around 6:40 p.m. to help set up chairs and left around 7:50 p.m. to go pick up Phil and Pam. She was never seen alive again. That same day, the body of Vernita Wheat, who had been missing for 21 days, was found badly decomposed in an abandoned apartment building 2 blocks away from Slater's Barbecue in Waukegan. She'd been bound with TV cables, and a wire had been tied around her neck as a ligature. Alton's fingerprint was found on a door at the abandoned building. On June 24th, an unknown 28-year-old victim was kidnapped at knife point, and it's believed Alton and Debra demanded to be driven to Detroit. The victim managed to escape once they arrived in Detroit.
62-year-old Palmer Jones was home with his wife, 59-year-old Marge Jones, on Thursday morning, June 28th. Around 7 a.m., Alton and Debra broke in, with Alton using a table leg as a weapon and Debra carrying a gun. They mercilessly beat the couple, leaving behind lacerations and a broken arm for Marge. They stole a car plus $90 from the couple, and they were on their way. A few days later, while still in Detroit, Alton and Debra chatted up 55-year-old Mary Billups on a street corner. They sweet-talked Mary into coming to her home for dinner and a place to stay. The next day, on July 3rd, they all rode over to Mary's friend's house, 55-year-old Marion Gaston. The two threatened Mary and Marion at knife point and then tied and gagged them in the basement. Alton beat Marion with a wrench and punched Mary so hard in the face that she was knocked unconscious. They stole Marion's car and headed towards Ohio. Once in Toledo, the two ran into a minister, Ernie Jackson. They told him they were from Decatur, Alabama, and that Alton was on leave from his post in Germany. The day they met, July 5th, Ernie ended up inviting the pair to his home for ribs, and while at the minister's house, they met 30-year-old Virginia Temple. And that brings us up to This Week in True Crime History.
Virginia had recently gone through a difficult divorce and was a single mom of 5 kids: 10-year-old Rochelle, 6-year-old Raymond, 5-year-old Michael, 3-year-old Kimberly, and 1-year-old Angela. The family all shared a house together on Auburn Avenue in Toledo. Virginia was back in college studying to be a home economics teacher. She was a busy mom of 5, and sometimes her mom, Edith, would come help out while Virginia was busy studying. The oldest, Rochelle, loved singing hymnals at church. While at the Jackson home for dinner, Virginia and Alton seemed to be getting along, and Virginia gave him her address. Alton and Debra ended up going to Virginia's the next day, and she invited them to stay for dinner. She even cut Alton's hair for him. It's a little unclear what happened next, but one report stated that one of Virginia's kids saw Alton take a knife from the kitchen and slip it into his pocket. After dinner, Virginia and Rochelle did dishes, and Alton and Debra and 2 of the boys watched TV together. A story about Alton and Debra came on the news. Alton quickly turned off the TV and told the kids to go to bed. The duo approached Virginia and Rochelle in the kitchen and attacked them with the knife. They forced both of them into the basement. Virginia was gagged with her baby's t-shirt. They beat, raped, and strangled them.
The morning of the 7th, their grandma Edith and aunt came over to play with the kids. It was unusually chilly that morning, so Edith had planned on entertaining the kids inside while Virginia studied. She rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. With 6 people in the house, that was unusual. There was no way Virginia would have taken the kids somewhere without telling their grandma. The aunt went to a window to see if she could spot anyone inside. It looked like a wild animal had been let loose. The furniture had been turned over and there was trash everywhere. There was a red stain on the floor. At this point, Alton and Debra had been all over the news, and Virginia's family feared the worst. They hoped they were overreacting, but called the police. Virginia's 4 other children were in the house and had seemingly slept through the murder of their mom and sister. They were not really sure what those little ones actually heard and saw that night. When they couldn't find their mom that morning, they were all scared and hid. Investigators searched the house and found the bodies of Virginia and Rochelle stuffed into the crawl space.
That same day, Alton and Debra met 77-year-old Frank Duvendak, the superintendent of Toledo schools. Alton somehow talked his way into being invited in Frank's house, and once inside, they forced Frank and his wife Dorothy upstairs at gunpoint. Frank was handcuffed, and Dorothy was tied with electrical cord, while the duo stole $200 and their car. 15-year-old Tawny Story left her junior high school in Cincinnati around 2 p.m. on July 11th after finishing a computer class. Later that day, around 6 p.m., a classmate of hers, Yvette Lewis, saw her walking with a black man and woman. Tawny didn't come home that night, and her parents reported her missing the next day. That same day, the body of 25-year-old Donna Williams was found. As you may recall, Donna had disappeared on June 19th after going to pick up Alton and Debra to take them to church with her. Her body was found in an abandoned warehouse, and she had been strangled to death with pantyhose. It could not be determined if she had been raped due to decomposition.
45-year-old Harry Walters and 44-year-old Marlene had posted their camper for sale in Cincinnati, Ohio. On July 13th, Alton and Debra showed up with the pretense of wanting to purchase their camper. Once in their house, Alton and Debra took them to the basement, bound, gagged, and beat them with a crowbar and pliers, then robbed them. Their 17-year-old daughter found them in the basement. Harry survived, but Marlene died from blunt force trauma. On July 16th, the couple met up with a friend, Thomas Harris, in Lexington, Kentucky. The trio ran into 33-year-old Oline Carmichael in a motel parking lot and abducted him. They called his wife to demand a ransom, but they never showed up at the spot to pick up the money, and eventually Oline was found in the trunk of his car.
At this point, Alton and Debra started to backtrack into territory that felt more familiar to them. On the 17th, they headed back to Dayton, Ohio, to a place they'd been before. 10 days earlier, they had met up with 79-year-old Reverend Millard Gay and his wife, 76-year-old Catherine. They met up with the Gays on the day of Virginia and Rochelle's murder and told the Reverend they had seen a room he'd had for rent. They stayed with the Gays until the 9th, and then the Reverend drove them to Cincinnati and dropped them off right before Tawny's disappearance. The Gays had not known who they were or what they were up to during their previous visit, but after the murders of Virginia and Rochelle and Tawny's kidnapping, they had been all over the news in Ohio. Millard told the couple he knew who they were. Alton allegedly responded, "Well, honey, I guess we'll have to burn them," as he pulled out a gun. Catherine, a real legend, jumped into action and knocked the gun out of Alton's hand. A scuffle ensued, and ultimately, Alton and Debra regained control and tied the Gays. They attempted to strangle Catherine, but failed. Alton then tried to shoot her, and his gun malfunctioned. They left them alive, but stole their money and car.
On the 19th, the badly decomposed body of Tawny Story was found in a vacant apartment in Cincinnati. She had been kidnapped a week earlier and had been strangled likely the same day. Due to decomp, authorities could not tell if she had been raped. At the crime scene, Debra's fingerprint was found on a Michael Jackson pin Tawny was wearing. A shoe print belonging to Alton was also at the scene. An envelope belonging to the Gays was found in the building where Tawny was located, along with a bracelet belonging to Virginia Temple. The same day, the body of 79-year-old Eugene Scott was found stabbed and shot to death in a ditch near Indianapolis, Indiana. He was found on his birthday. The duo had stolen his car to drive to their next destination.
The rampage finally came to an end on July 20th, when an old classmate of Alton's spotted him in Evanston, Illinois. Police caught up with the pair in Mason Park, where they both claimed to be different people, but ultimately surrendered. A loaded gun was found in Debra's purse and a knife in Alton's boot. This was a complicated case since the two had a trail of victims in 6 states, and officials from each state got together to talk strategy. The goal was to seek the death penalty, and Ohio seemed like the best bet since Ohio had the death penalty, and the two had murdered 4 people there.
They were tried in Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana. Alton maintained his innocence throughout his trials and acted as his own attorney in Ohio and Illinois. That's such a serial killer
that's
trait.
A red flag right there, yeah.
He was sentenced to death for 4 of the murders and received many life sentences in addition to the death sentences. Throughout the years, his case was sent to the U.S. Supreme Court many times, but his sentence was held up on April 26, 2002. His final meal was a giant feast consisting of a well-done filet mignon smothered with mushrooms, fried chicken, a salad with French dressing, sweet potato pie topped with whipped cream, French fries, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, broccoli with melted cheese, biscuits and gravy, and cherry Coke.
Whoa, buddy.
Yeah, quite the feast. Actually, all sounds very delicious except for the meat part to this vegan. But yeah. His final words were, "The Lord is my shepherd," which he repeated over and over. Debra was given 2 death sentences, but in 1998, her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment by Ohio Governor Richard Celeste due to her intellectual disability. In 1991, her Indiana sentence was similarly commuted to 60 years in prison. She was the last woman to be on death row in Indiana. We do want to know that the families of her victims were not notified of her sentence being commuted, and Tamika Turk's family have been very vocal about their disapproval of not being told of this change and their feeling that justice has not been served. Today, Debra is 59 years old and is serving her sentence at Dayton Correctional Facility. She has expressed remorse for her involvement and apologized to the families of her victims in a video in 2005, which I have not been able to locate. So if anyone has seen that, definitely send that our way. So those are the victims of Alton and Debra.
Wow. I'm surprised how I can feel shocked every episode.
Right.
Every news story that I research or you present, I'm just like, really? Like the injury of Annie, where it said her intestines were coming out from her vagina. I've never heard of anyone, like, especially a child, like surviving an injury like that. That's really sounds horrific. And being able to still talk to people and you know, identify the people who assaulted her.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
So horrific. I'm not sure how she survived that and just how brutal the nature of that attack was. You know, like I feel like sometimes when we use like language or like, oh, and then the 9-year-old was raped, like that sort of thing. It sounds
you
so
don't think
like
about
flippant.
how
like
injurious that is.
Exactly.
Because they're just a small creature. Like,
right. They're so small. And clearly this is something that Alton and Debra were taking their time with and just being rough and awful. And so
it's disgusting.
Really terrible. So impressive that there were survivors that were able to like identify them throughout. And I was also so impressed with the wife of the minister who was 76, I think. And
and kicked the gun out of his hand or something.
Like so impressive. And like, I totally understand why, like not to victim blame anybody who didn't survive, like why you would not feel comfortable trying to knock a gun out of somebody's hand. Like maybe they weren't going to kill you, now you end up dead. Like it's definitely a big risk, but it's just like being 76 and like she's having this scuffle with these 2 serial killers. It's just
real badassery on both like ends of the age spectrum, really, in this story.
Absolutely.
Like,
absolutely.
And I also like hearing his last meal, Alton's last meal, described. It makes me wonder, like, I know there's been a lot of talk about people's last meals, and there's even, I think, a cookbook or something about this, which is interesting. But it makes me wonder if anyone's ever tried to pull some stunt, like wanting to have a hot dog eating competition, like bring me 300 hot dogs and like, you know, just buying time, I guess.
Right. I'm sure it has been attempted.
Like why not fill yourself full of junk if you're not going to live for the indigestion? I don't know.
Right. Gosh.
It's weird.
Yeah, the indigestion after all of this.
That would hurt. Like, that would hurt.
I mean, I love making myself like a buffet, you know, like especially in the time of Uber Eats and lockdown and like I've been ordering so much more food in than I ever had in my entire life because I always like eating out at a restaurant or like cooking.
Yeah.
But man, the buffets I've been making myself. So admittedly, this collard greens and it all sounds delicious.
Some onion rings, some mushrooms. Yes. Let's do it.
Yes.
So what have you been watching this week?
Well, I did finally watch something true crimey, which I'm sure you have watched too, but I watched the first 2 episodes of Only Murders in the Building.
Yes. And there's another one, I guess, right now as we're recording this, waiting for us today. It's great so far. Not disappointed in the least with this.
Really
new
great.
season.
It kept up the energy. It's, it's already like, I don't know. Do you have any like early guesses of who it could be?
No. No. Do you?
I do. I don't know if I say it, though, for anybody who hasn't started. Maybe they're not sure that this person's on the show. But how about I will say this? I think it's the new famous person that's on it. The new famous person who's replacing Sting.
That sounds plausible, but also it sounds like a good red herring, which I guess the show is really
I don't know.
into.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's my early guess. Just because we've seen 2 episodes. Like, it's got to be someone there. I guess it could be the other new famous person somehow. The love interest.
Oh, yeah.
But then we'd have 2 love interests that were the killer for 2 seasons since it was Amy from The Office.
Well, I mean, that could happen.
Yeah. Maybe.
It's dangerous to be in love. I don't know.
Yeah. She doesn't seem at all guilty yet. So maybe it is her.
Yeah. I guess that's where, they get 2 famous new guests and one is a red herring and one is the killer. That would make sense.
Well, please believe that by the time the season is over, I will have guessed every single person is guilty, including like Selena Gomez. So just wait for it.
Yeah. It was all of them.
They all did it together. They wanted Bunny dead. How about for you?
Well, I started watching that, the FLDS thing. Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey, which is expectedly creepy. It's kind of exactly what I expected so far. I just saw 2 first episodes. There's 2 more. I mean, I think I'm pretty familiar with this story, especially like we read a book on this, I think.
We did. The Banner of Heaven.
Yeah, Under the Banner of Heaven, right. Yeah. And, there's other shows exploring it, but it never ceases to be creepy as heck.
So creepy.
Yeah. I also watched some more just scary stuff. My friend brought me this episode of the series Creepshow because there was an episode called Dead and Breakfast. It's really cheesy and really funny. And basically it's like a true crime vlogger who stays in this supposedly haunted bed and breakfast, which actually sounds like it's kind of modeled off of the house of Dorothea Puente. Remember how there was that person who bought the house and they put like a fake dead body on the front. So in this story, it's like a killer grandma or whatever. But it's just real pure cheese and like nonstop
interesting
laughs for me. So I felt like my friend wanted to show it to me because, of course, I'm into true crime and I guess occasionally come off as a bit of a true crime vlogger when I do some TikToks or whatever. But it's funny to just cover all the bases. Like we watched a movie while you were here about a killer hairstylist. Right. And I said, well, why not just explore my other passion with murder? Yeah. So that was cool. And then I watched The Stepfather from 1987, which has been since remade, but the remake was not good. But the old one is really good. Really good 80s horror vibes. And I started watching Cults and Extreme Belief. Which is a series about cults and extreme belief. But it's really cool because each episode at first is on different cults. There's a lot of things that we have covered on the show. It starts with NXIVM. They talk about Moonies a bit. And then the last couple episodes, which I haven't watched yet, are about the survivors. And the survivors all speak out about their experiences. I love that. So that's great. Yeah. It's all worth a watch. Nothing terrible in that mix. So
great. So I do want to give yet another shout out to Vancouver Murderinos, who just really delivering. But thank you so much to our friend Mimi, who listened to our podcast this past week and sent us like the nicest message about how much she enjoyed it. And
thanks, Mimi,
man, those
awesome.
messages mean so much. Like, I feel like I doubt myself all the time about whether anything I ever say is useful or interesting and not just like total chaos.
Yeah.
So just like to hear that somebody listened to it and is not just saying that because they're like my mom or something, like it just really means a lot. So thanks for the encouragement.
Yeah, we love that. It is a really insecure sort of position to be constantly putting out a new episode of a show and not hearing a lot of like verbal validation or feedback. You know, you're just wondering like, how is this hitting? Like people are listening, but do they hate it? It's good to know. It's good to know once in a while that like people actually think we're doing a decent job. And I also want to give sort of an anonymous shout out, I guess, to one of the members of our Murder News Facebook group had posted that they are in the process of sort of coming out as non-binary, and they felt so at home with us talking about all the queer issues and offering so much support to that. And I love that. And I'm so happy for this person.
Absolutely.
And I am so glad that we actually are cultivating an air of sort of support and respect for the community because, that's all we want to do.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your trust and sharing that too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess that's enough murder for 1 week. If you need more, you can get your fill on murdermurder.news, where we post the latest breaking true crime news articles every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at MurderMurder News, where we have just started posting photo hints each week about the case we'll be discussing on our upcoming episode. So make sure you follow us there so you can take a guess and earn yourself a shout out on the show. Or if someone guesses correctly over and over, we might have to start sending out prizes. And we actually did have somebody guess it correctly this week. We had posted a photo of basically a recreation of a decapitated head from the killer that we presented this past week.
Joel Rifkin.
Yeah, Joel Rifkin, which was the landscaper.
Yeah, the Long Island
landscaper. So the person who guessed that was one of our good podcast friends, always time for true crime. So well done on guessing that.
Good job.
You can find us on Twitter at Murder News and on TikTok at MurderMurder News, where we are slowly but surely starting to post more frequently. We are going to get back into that this weekend, I swear. And you can also find our page on Facebook just by searching for MurderMurder News.
And while you're on Facebook searching for MurderMurder News, you'll also see our group pop up. Join us there, and you can chat with us about stories you hear on the show or anything generating buzz in the realm of true crime. You'll also want to make sure you're a member of our group so you don't miss any announcements about the Monster Book Club. We're reading Just Like Mother by Anne Heltzel this month, and I'm about a third of the way through. It's already very engaging and so creepy. Get reading, and you can join us on Zoom on the last Sunday of this month for a discussion.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through, and it's really good, guys. Definitely join us. And make your random act of kindness with a 5-star rating and review of our show on Apple Podcasts. We all have these little moments when we need a little pick-me-up. When we're feeling down, we like to read over all the glowing reviews from our listeners. Of course, we've already read all the reviews on our show to date, and we need more to help us through the dark days ahead. And it really is dark and gloomy here in Vancouver. Help us out.
Yeah, please. A little sunshine.
Thanks in advance.
All right. Well, have a wonderful week.
Bye, friends.
Bye, friends.